So we've had some problems with really, really small preschoolers that are sort of on the small size, from like 3 and down. We actually internally just had this conversation. Um, so about a year ago, it was before the last forum, I had reached out a couple times and was told no, that they didn't have any more to share. So I almost wonder if maybe they ran out, or like you said, Alicia, they only had 1 or 2, but didn't feel like there was enough demand to order more. So maybe we should actually get a list of people and who need them and how many they need, and maybe send that all at once. So they're not, because their perception of kind of random requests might be off. But maybe if we say like, we actually have this many people that need this many. So total, this is how many actually we need as a field, or at least the group of us. Because there's at least 2 or 3 studies in my head, and I'm not even counting Linka and what she's got coming, that could use multiple for each study, but
We
we've
could
been
use,
told they're not
yeah,
available.
we could use two. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily
Okay.
suggest you tell him, but he could charge us a little bit of money and we would buy them.
Totally. Yeah, I would totally buy them. I was just told that they weren't available. So
Right.
we've had to really question certain children, or drop them, or, put an asterisk on it because you don't know if it's a good score altogether. So I'm more than happy to like crowdsource that, um, get that email and kind of CC everybody if you want to be CC'd on it, and reach out cohesively. Um, and then let him make the decision how he wants to approach that. But I know a lot of people that need them and can't get them.
I think okay, I don't want this to come across wrong. I think
Yeah.
my perception is that Werner's a physicist. He's
Yeah.
not a social scientist. He's not using these in data collections in the same way that many of us are. So I don't know that he's thinking about the same kinds of questions we are related to standardizing the data collection, and especially the finger placement, because it's so different. So for me, I can get the little tiny finger on the top of the lens, but whether it's in the same place each time with the giant finger cradle, and you've got this little tiny finger, like that's, to me, it's adding a lot of variability that I don't really want to have. I was able to get them to go through everything because I'm here in Utah, and I said, I'm coming up and I'm going to come sit in your office. And then they went and looked through all their boxes and they found one, but they only have the one. So they couldn't give it to me. They would need it to make more copies. So I think there's potential there. But again, similar to what you were saying, Virginia, I've collected data from preschool kids and lots of little young elementary students, and some of them are so small. So one of the things that I started doing was using a ring sizer, like a jeweler's ring sizer, and I'm measuring the last knuckle on whichever finger we're measuring. So in my lab, we tend to use the non-dominant ring finger. And it's been really predictive of their score, which makes me worry about this. So the predictive nature of age, when you're looking at elementary and middle school, especially age students, the older they were in our larger data sets, the higher their score would be, which also doesn't always make sense. But when I started thinking about like this one element of how big their finger is, I'm just concerned that it's a measurement error.
So we've seen the same thing, and this was the conversation we just had via email, because we have a doctoral student collecting on preschoolers in Nebraska, and she had some concerns about the 3-year-olds. My only question is, how do we figure out whether or not that cradle creates any kind of modification or error in and of itself? And so do we need to be thinking, and this is another conversation for another day, but do we need to be thinking about how we might test that before we start adding this modification and thinking that that's all good, we've added this modification and move forward? And again, that's probably another conversation for another day, but maybe the first thing we do is try to figure out what we need to do to get a modification, and then we can figure out what we need to do maybe as a team to test it.
Yeah, so I'd be interested in some of those conversations as they go
Okay.
forward.
Yeah,
I think
Alicia,
there are a couple of us who work with younger kids that would be interested.
I want to move on to the next topic, because again, I'm going to keep you keep you, I don't know, on the hot seat here, Alicia, but I really want to get to this. I'm curious because we published a paper showing that we saw an increase in kids, and now, wait, was it just because their finger got bigger? They were, 9-10-year-olds. So I want to have, this might be a topic to revisit, like Virginia was saying. So this is another thing that you had shared in the pre-survey. And I'll ask about the finger cradle as a question in the follow-up survey. So just don't complete it yet, but we'll add that. And maybe about this as well. So Alicia, I'm going to let you sort of take this.
Yeah, so I've had conversations with several of you, and then from our previous meeting last spring, I started thinking about some labs are doing single measurements and then taking the average. Some like everybody's not everybody's doing it completely differently, but there are some variations in how we're looking at doing that. And I started thinking specifically about the averages. So when I do single scores and I average the 3, there's often quite a bit of variation in the 3. And I worry that the average, if that variation is just like one of the scores that's very different, then taking the average is allowing that outlier to pull the mean toward the outlier, right? So I started thinking about potential ways that we could look at this maybe, and how, if we're thinking about how height is measured, for example, that you take 2 measures, and if they're more different than a certain amount, then you take a 3rd measure and you take the average of the 2 that are the closest to each other. I'm wondering if that kind of a protocol might be helpful to use. But to do that, we either have to be taking all single measures, which I know some groups are doing, but not every group is. So I started talking in this conversation I was having with Werner about them just tweaking the software so that the output includes the average score of all 3 measures as well as the single scores, so that we don't have to, like, it would just save some time in terms of collecting the data. And then also asking if they could include in the output what the melanin reading was, as well as potentially changing some of the other fields to just make it fit better with the kind of data that I'm trying to collect. So I wondered what everyone's thoughts were about what variables are collected and what the output looks like. What would you want to have? Because it sounds like they're interested in making some tweaks to this for those of us who want to try it out.
One thing is, it sounds like it'll be a more expensive machine, and we just have to accept that.
It already does all of this.
Oh, the melanin, that's right.
It just
Yeah.
doesn't give you the
Doesn't
score
record them.
for it. Yeah.
Good point.
I think melanin would be great. This is Stephanie. And Susan has her hand up, but I don't know if that's from something else.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think it would be really interesting, and this is not exactly what you asked, but to have, we do the light and the dark, but that's not really calibration. And I would like to know something about how to actually calibrate it to know if it is shifted or drifted. So you can put that on a little wish list. I think that is something very different. I would also note that there's a study that I have with some of you guys on the call and some other sites too, where we're not exactly looking at this 3 versus 1, but we are looking at inter-device reliability, because for people with multiple devices, noticed a fair bit of variation between those devices, same person, same finger, and so we've got that study going now, and I think there's maybe 6 or some odd sites. And so that data is hopefully going to be collected from the sites through the spring. And so that's not exactly what you had necessarily talked about, but I do think it sort of fits within this neighborhood of conversations. We did not with that study, because we were taking 5 pairs of measures across, 35 or some odd minutes. We did not do the triplicate. We just did a single measure. So that's the protocol, but we needed to have 5 pairs of readings